Hero Club presents Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu.
Welcome to Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu, episode 90. I am your host and co-creator, Wheelchair21. Tonight's show is going to be jam-packed because this is our 90th episode, and we're finally going to do the entire series review and summary of Lupinranger versus Patranger. Joining me tonight is my pretty much esteemed co-host, as always. It's SoundOut12.
I am here. I have a table full of LuPat toys that I'm totally not laying out just so I can do a video review later, but totally have them just for this podcast.
And do as sound effects, because we'll need some sound effects for this video.
Because I have proof that the Patrangers were robbed.
They were always robbed.
Mm-hmm.
Also with us
Further proof that they were robbed.
Also with us is Visibleninja, Metal Ninja, joining us for our table of three.
Yes, sir.
Alright, so with this episode, like I said, we are going to be talking about freaking Kaito Sentai Lupinranger versus Keisatsu Sentai Patranger. That was the previous Sentai series that concluded earlier this year, right before we went into Kishi Ryu Sentai Ryu Soldier. It is the first actual Sentai series to feature two actual full teams that take up, numbers 42 and 43, something like that in the official rankings. On top
Basically, it kind of syncs up the rankings to the years that Sentai's been on air.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons they did that, yeah.
Yeah, it fixes up that inconsistency of Go Ranger running for more than a year, like running into 2 years. So, because of that, it kind of fixes that so that the team numbers match the year numbers.
Yes. So, the interesting thing about that is we have two teams that both copyrights to try to fix the abnormality with the Go Ranger running that long with almost 75 episodes.
84.
And 84. Okay, I thought it was 75. I always forget. I'm always confused by that. Yeah. So with Go Ranger running long, that's what happened. On top of that, they did this whole aesthetic where the show kind of runs as Phantom Thieves versus cops. And that was pretty much the entire idea of the concept, is that in the show we have these weird interdimensional alien-like creatures called the Ganglas. They are pretty much a small, crime syndicate mob family kind of ordeal that go from, dimension to dimension, planet to planet. And they just kind of take whatever's theirs. They just want stuff. They just take it. They're kleptomaniacs. And they all have this weird gimmick that they all have these special safes that they just store whatever they steal in them. This time around, they are stealing this thing called the Lupin Collection. These are special artifacts that Arsene Lupin himself allegedly stole that somehow have just crazy, abnormal, supernatural abilities. There's stuff like mind controlling, removing the stench and odor from stuff, shrinking, growing, seeing into people, X-ray vision, stuff like that, super speed. Just pretty much name a weird special ability or an actual real superpower, and these devices give you that. And if they're all together, they're kind of like the Dragon Balls and can grant a wish, supposedly. So, the aesthetic is that for our thieves, our main three, red, blue, and yellow, they get roped into this by Kogure, an advocate of the Arsene family, who is looking to reclaim the collection from the Ganglas. And these three were roped in because one of the Ganglers, in quotations, killed their significant, loved ones in a sense. For red, it was his brother. For blue, it was his fiancée. For yellow, it was not just her best friend, but most of her actual class, her high school class, were killed on, a field trip. And they are chosen to try to get the things back, to bring back the people that were taken from them. At the same time, we also have the police Sentai running around going after our actual Ganglers, trying to stop them. But they don't know that the safes actually control and hold their actual Lupin collections, so that's why them and the Phantom Thieves are always in a conflict with each other. As they come in, they either stop the monster dead in its tracks and take the collection piece, or they leave it for the cops to finish off anyways. So the cops kind of don't understand what's going on. They think the thieves are just stealing the collection just for the sake of the collection. And they're kind of not putting two and two together that these guys may actually be working for the Lupin family or whatnot. So to them, they think that they're straight up thieves and they don't get the concept. So it's a long game of cat and mouse. And then it gets even finickier when a member of the Arsene family, or should we say, the people that work for the family of Arsene Lupin shows up, called Noel, and he is actually Lupin X / Patranger X, who's a gold and silver senshi who flips-flops between both, where he's giving the thieves information and he's giving the cops information about the things, and he's trying to kind of coerce them to working together, because he wants them to actually come to an end to justify the means scenario of we just gotta work together, but the cops are kind of too stick up their ass in logistics of playing it by the book, that the show show kind of runs on that cat and mouse formula way longer than it essentially needs to, where eventually by the time we get to our finale, it's kind of like the old school Sentai typical, we're just going to start killing off our main generals like episode by episode or every 3 episodes within the last 8 to 10 episodes. So pretty much we get Dessel, the giant grenade watermelon dude, beat. We get Gosh beat. The Lupinrangers themselves get their revenge on actually Zamigo, and then the cops get the takedown, obviously, Don DeGuerro, or Dog de Grano, who is the leader of the actual Ganglers. And
it's called Dogranio.
Dogranio. And the big core of the story is just that, like, it's the cops and the police trying to come together and be friends, but also trying to play, law by the book. And it's one of those stories where, I guess the best way to explain it is, it's supposed to be sometimes people do bad things for good reasons, and sometimes people who have to do good have to play by the laws of society kind of thing. It's like a bit of, you gotta understand justice is justice. I guess that's how it kind of works out. And it also shows that even though you're on different sides of the law, you can still bring justice or whatnot. It's kind of a weird story. It's kind of an interesting take. But I can also see why a lot of people either loved, hated, or were right in the middle with this show. Because like I said, they play the game of cat and mouse all the way to practically the end, when it's beating like a dead horse at this point. But it still has a pretty good send-off for the show, even though most of the show, when you're watching it, heavily actually works on the suit effects, the character-driven parts, and the mechas, for once, are kind of pushed a little bit to the background. They're so background, it's not even funny when you think about it. Which is actually a very interesting point we'll get to later in the episode. So overall, like I said, that's our main core story, is they just come together and they eventually take out all the villains who only did it for the laughs. They only did it for the lols. That's their motives, and that was their narrative for the whole show, was they just did it to do it. So, did I nail the show on the head, guys?
Yeah, I think it pretty much covers everything story-wise. Something that I think needs to be highlighted, because it's something that people don't talk about with the show, was the bold direction in cinematography. There was some crazy stuff going with either GoPro shots or some kind of thing where you'd have like a fish eye lens kind of look, and you would have 360 action sequences either following the POV of a ranger or rangers in what seemed to be single take shots but could be composite shots, and a lot of really cool cinematography tricks that even me as a trained person that has studied the film production looks at this and is like, that looks so cool, and I have no idea how they did it. And that is something the show definitely needs to be complimented for. It's amazing. It makes it look unlike other Super Sentai shows.
Well, I want to add on that it did actually take an idea and concept that has already been approached in Super Sentai, but not essentially on an actual season or series, but they took it from Koichi's take of when he did the first Space Squad film, when the Deca Rangers had their final battle with that one guy, because they did a lot of that GoPro first-person cam kind of style, which I think they saw that and were like, let's do this because these are also cops. And they went with that format for the cinematography.
Well, it worked, because they started doing that kind of stuff a bit in Q Ranger, and then they just carried it over. And honestly, I thought it added a lot more dynamic action to the show, because it gave you, a different perspective we're not used to seeing in Sentai.
Alright, so since we also talked about the story and a bit of the cinematography, I want to go first to Visibleninja as usual, because we go in the tiers of who goes first. Is the lowest you are,
yeah.
The first you go. We're gonna go to you first, and just talk about just the story, what you thought of, from episode 1 to episode 51.
Okay, just sticking straightly with the plot. Honestly, there's not too much of it for a good chunk of the episode, other than just the usual Don Gronio, or whatever you want to call him. Basically just sending out hopefuls to take over his position down, them getting their asses beat, Lupin stealing their collection piece, which is, a recolored previous Sentai prop, and then either getting blown up by either the Patrangers or the Lupinrangers. Not much to it. Early on, I did like the few little nuggets they put in there, obviously hinting towards, some developments later. And then Noel comes in and just kind of busts that shit wide open, because you don't know what he really is. Like, you don't know where he stands, because he helps both teams, but he also has his own agenda, which we find out isn't really that sinister in the end. And his big grand secret is kind of okay.
Yeah, if you can explain it, go right ahead, because I did omit that from my explanation.
Oh yeah, that it turns out that our backflipping buddy Noel is actually descended from humans who fled from the Gangler world, and obviously Arsene Lupin was among those. and yeah, that's part of the reason why he created the collection. I guess you could say he invoked some of their mystical, nondescript powers into there. And of course, it also turns out the one that recruited all the Lupinrangers, Kogure, is also a descendant, particularly from Arsène Lupin himself. And not to mention this elf, they're also trying to get back the collection for their own agenda, I guess you could say, even though ultimately it's to everyone's benefit.
Yeah, like, that was the funny part, was like, their benefit was the same of the Three's benefit, that were the Lupinrangers, that we're just trying to revive everyone who was killed by...
bring back the
ganglers.
people we lost.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in their case, it's more direct, but yeah.
Yeah, but continue on with your thought of the story, though, once Noel joined them.
Which is unfortunate because, yeah, the Patrangers definitely did get the short end of the stick. And again, we'll talk about the characters in a little bit, but, like, overall, they did seem to be, a lot more of the story was Lupin-focused on them and their desires, their needs, their trying to hide their identities from the Patrangers, etc., as opposed to the Patrangers, who at times did come across as kind of flat, even though if you put them in an episode with their, compatriot Lupinranger, they actually did manage to shine a bit. But I'm just kind of sad that they didn't get a bit more of the spotlight, even though they were the quote-unquote good guys. Although, ultimately, they were kind of both good guys. Just one was more morally ambiguous than the other. And, like, the whole thing with the ganglers, it honestly felt kind of weak sauces. Yeah, they're supposed to be, like, this mafioso-type family, and Don Gronio is basically trying out potential successors, almost all of which has failed. Then you have his, his right-hand man and his left-hand woman, essentially, who, once again, they do seem to have their own kind of agendas, but ultimately it just comes down to the same old, Don Gronio wants to take over our world, destroy it, boom, 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 enslave humans, yada, yada. So, the villains weren't really that compelling. The monster suit designs were actually kind of cool, but ultimately when it comes down to it, the only real part of the overall story that was actually interesting was, I would probably say, Noel's, and I guess followed by the Patrangers, the Lupinrangers rather. That's one thing is, about a good half of the show was just not developed or explored as much as I would have personally liked, but what was explored was pretty enjoyable to me, at least.
Alright, found out. Pick up where Visibleninja left off with your take.
So, like, contrary to a lot of people, kind of had the same kind of idea as Metal, where there wasn't enough for a lot of people in terms of story and character stuff, or at least, like, plot developments. But for me, I found that I actually really love this show. And that could come from, like, my quote-unquote Showa sensibility, where I kind of prefer shows that are more episodic as opposed to more plot-driven. And I thought that, like, it was really great watching it, especially weekly, because of that episodic nature. But I thought it was really nice how Q-Ranger had, like, a bit of an issue trying to juggle its 12 Rangers, and I felt like LuPat managed to juggle its 7 a lot better. In the terms that, where with Q-Ranger, there's obvious characters where it's like, oh, Garu didn't get that much development, Hammy didn't get any focus till the sequel movie, and characters like Champ were very basic. Where, on the flip side, LuPat kind of had the more feeling of everybody was fleshed out in a way. People like Sakuya didn't get as deep of stories because he's just a simple person. Whereas Tsukasa had like a lot of backstory and kind of like her secret, softer side that she doesn't like to show people. Or you have Keiichiro, who is very stubborn and headstrong, but there's reasons for that because he's just trying to do the best job he can.
Wow, let's talk about the characters, don't we?
I'm getting there. I'm just using those three as an example.
I'm just saying the characters come next. They come after.
I know the characters come next. That is not even all I have to say about these characters. I'm just getting somewhere. Let me speak. I got this. So because of that, the story ends up being kind of a secondary thing to a lot of the character work, which is why I think, it's much more of a better character-driven series than a story-driven series, which is what I kind of enjoy more in the long run. And overall, I think the structure of the series itself kind of leads to that with a lot of, swapping back and forth of who gets focused. Sometimes it's one team, sometimes it's the other. I'm very annoyed how halfway through the show, the Patranger team just started getting sidelined. But they really picked up by the end. I'm so happy they got the final battle and they got to take down the final boss of the Ganglers. That, I think, it kind of equaled it out sort of by the end, which worked for me. I'm done.
Okay. Because like I said, when you went on the weird tangent about the character story, that was where I was like, oh god, what if
Oh no, I'm like not even getting, I was just trying to like make an example.
Oh yeah, no, that's the only reason why I wanted to butt in was like, sometimes you go and then I'm like, oh crap, he went so far. It was
Yeah,
like,
no, that's
oh, no.
how I wasn't going. It was just like those are the top 3 characters I think of when the show, because
Oh, yeah, no.
Patrangers. Yeah.
You know, that's why I'm just apologizing also on air and to you. It's like, I'm saying that, like, normally sometimes
Yeah.
when you go, you actually go, like, Visibleninja and go to the next part before we even get there. And I'm like, what? Did you guys pass go and collect $200 already? No. So anyways, with me with the story, this is the thing. I like Sentai that can be episodic, but I also like Sentai that can sort of play with the idea of being an episodic show, but still tell a story, if you get my drift, because there are other Sentai series where the parts don't always line up, but when they do, it feels gratifying in the end. And this is one of those ones where I don't feel entirely gratified, but I still feel enjoyment for this show. I think personally, what I didn't like was that because they wanted to keep the cat and mouse game of who are the Lupinrangers to like the very butt end of like the last 3 episodes, I think it did drag down a bit of the show in the aesthetic of they were trying to build up to them being an actual teamwork when they need to be a teamwork kind of theme. Or just gelling, or just being able to be, in a sense where, to the public, the Lupinrangers are still the Phantom Thieves wearing the masks, but they're actually still working with the police. Like, I thought, like, we were gonna build to something a little bit more to explain, was it Good Striker VXX? Like, I think that's the problem is with the show is when they created a mecha that formulates on teamwork, and they only used it 3 times, and it doesn't take into any consideration to the final battle, at least in some regards, that's where I was like, that's kind of weird. Just to me personally, I felt like that was kind of weird. Like, I do like the Patrangers didn't get entirely sidelined, where they got to take down the Don, or whoever was the big bad. In this case, it was the Don himself. That was great. But I do kind of feel like a little miffed that you create an actual combination that requires all 7 people to harmonize, and you only use it like 3 times in the actual show. And in those 3 times, only like 2 of them really mattered. And that kind of feels a little lackluster, because, like, that's what one thing for me is I feel like the cat and mouse game ran just too long. I feel that once the whole Destra thing came around, that's when the masks should have entirely came off, and, like, the next couple of episodes were them all the way up to Gosh going, oh, I can't trust you anymore. And then Gosh trying to actually kill Patranger, Lupin, Noel, should have brought them fully back together where it shouldn't have been a big deal. Like, that's how I think, like, if you rewrote the ending a little bit, you could have still done, oh, they fought Zamigo in the Dawn, and then got the collection pieces, and then somehow did the whole, we summon VSX together. But, like, it's one of those things of damned if you do, damned if you don't, hindsight's 2020. But, like, that's the thing is, like, I did like a lot of the episodic moments, and I did like a lot of the character-driven episodes when they would do stuff for, like, say, Keiichiro, Sakurasa, and, like, your Lupinrangers. Like, they did make a lot of good character-driven episodes in this series, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I think that was the problem, was that, like, they were building up to a bigger reveal, and it felt like them being a team, than them having to have this weird sort of rush kind of ending of, oh, I can't believe you were really them the whole time. How could you not when the clues were right there in front of you for 40 effing episodes? That's just me personally. I feel like they
did address that early on. Like, always the defense was that
Kogure
the Lupinrangers tricked them. And so it was like, that point, that's where they kind of gave up on that lead until the end, where it's like, oh yeah, everything makes sense now.
Well, no, the thing is, I feel like, though, they did play it out a little too long, because, like, they did do a couple of tricks that worked right. In an episode where they were turned into kids. Worked alright. The early episode when they first did the first police sting. But, like, I find it funny that, like, all of this stuff, how they wrote it, like, snuck through the cracks about the missing persons cases until, like, the end when, like, they were like, hey, why is Noel Googling Zamigo in our databanks? Like, that was, like, kind of, like, one of the weird things. Like, I do feel like the issue that I have is that Zamigo still could have been at the end. They didn't have to use him as that midway point to fully bring them together. But I feel like there could have been a more of a real connection between there. So there would have been, like, a weird dissolution towards the end where they have the ends justify the means of working together. Because you create a concept with VSX, and it kind of just goes out the window. So, like, for me, it's like, I like a lot of the show's execution, but I also feel like areas do feel flat, because the show themselves in Japan were like, oh, let's push the Lupinrangers, but then they sometimes didn't have the best character-driven episodes outside of Kairi, and then everyone was like, well, we like the Patrangers because you did a few good episodes about them, and everyone, you know, internationally liked them, but Japan, because they like Phantom Thieves, were like, only Phantom Thieves. And it got to like a really weird scenario, which we'll talk about in just a moment with our characters. So like, I feel like it's one of those shows where I feel like it's not the greatest, but I don't think it's the worst, because I do see a lot of people on social media now hating its story, and I don't essentially see why. But I'm guessing it's maybe because they were hoping for stuff that, like I said, kind of, you know, in a sense, irked me, but it didn't irk me enough where I was like, I hate the show outright.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing I think that comes up a lot is like, and this is a continuing theme, is I do think that there are a lot of people out there when they watch Sentai, they think it's Kamen Rider and that it's going to be super serialized. Because I see that complaint a lot with Sentai. Oh, it's too episodic. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what Sentai is, though. Sentai is more episodic than Rider is. It's a fact of life.
Well, no, I don't see it like that was actually Rider, because, like, for me, I've seen other Sentais that are episodic, and I think the problem is it's more or less the more modern ones that we're more used to have more of that episodic feel while being episodic in serialized format, where they are able to sometimes make a good contrast with each other. But in recent years, Sentai hasn't been good at doing either. They're only good at doing one or the other, and they're not able to get that blend like some of the older ones within the last decade or 20 years have been able to sort of do. Because, I mean, look at Ranger. Like, they had a serialized story, but were able to tell it in weirdly episodic arcs. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's been other Sentais that had a serialized story, like Ginga Man, but there were episodic moments. Even,
right.
like, you see what I'm saying? It's like, there are seasons that do back up the claim. You can have a serialized story mixed with episodic events. And I think that was the problem, was that maybe the problem wasn't with Patranger versus Lupinranger was they couldn't get it right. It was maybe because they were trying to do a story where you had actual two teams that are supposed to be conflicting with each other, rather than being the Lupinrangers being undercover cops working with the actual on-scene cops.
And that was another thing, too, is that the goal of police was just 3 people, a robot, and their commander.
Yeah, Metal, do you have anything you want to add to that?
They do seem curiously understaffed for something as serious as this gangler threat. As you guys were saying earlier about Sentai being too serialized, like, yeah, as Sound Touch, that's just the nature of the beast. And Sentai is less emphasis on an overarching plot. Like, it's still there, but it's really just more of an excuse plot to give some reason for Monsters of the Week to happen, which they can kind of just keep simmering in the background until we get to, say, like, mid-season or then, you know, the end of the season. I know a lot of people tend to prefer more substantial ongoing plots, like every episode advances the plot unless it's a very obvious filler episode or clip show or something like that. But LuPat, they tried, but it just didn't kind of satisfy even somebody like me who knows what to expect. Even that was a little on the too thin side.
Here's a theory that I want to bring up, and then we'll go into characters. This is a theory that I have. A lot of people that got into Sentai usually are people that actually did like Power Rangers. And I'm wondering, is it because Power Rangers serializes its stories is why we expect Sentai to follow that same accord? Is it just because of our Americana that expects it? Because I don't also think it's just the people who joined in because of Kamen Rider, then they jumped to Sentai. Yeah. Because usually it's Sentai to Rider in most cases. So I think it's actually Power Rangers that affects people when going into Sentai.
Honestly, that is probably it, because like, if you look at Ranger, there's basically almost no real serialization until you get to our boy Dragon Ranger showing up. And then we do get about, like, 4 or 5 episodes worth of, like, decent serialized, like, an actual arc. But then after that, it just kind of peters out to kind of nothing. You know, it goes back to Monster of the Week shenanigans until, you know, our boy Burai dies. And then in the end, when they have to defeat Bandora, they don't have to touch the plot again. Whereas with Power Rangers, yeah, they did try to do a lot more serialization, like especially in Season 2 and majorly in Season 3. Like, they definitely went for the multi-parters, which is probably colored people's expectations for Sentai. Not realizing that it's always been more episodic as opposed to more serialized.
Alright, I'm just gonna say this right now. Sandra, you remember the other night when Darkon talked about electricity? That just had me so dumbfounded right now. I was like, damn, Metal. Damn. You spoke from the soul. Damn.
Yeah, that honestly covered everything I was thinking about when we this idea that, yeah, maybe Power Rangers did create a false theory, you know, but like Metal, you summarized it, you encapsulated it perfectly.
Like, he took my theory, and he was
like, oh my God. I've had my eureka moment.
My god. Like, I wish people could see my reaction. I'm like, oh my god, is this like when Darko was talking about Japanese electricity versus American currents? Bong!
Yeah, no, my brain's just, wow.
Wow. Okay, and with that, let's talk about those characters now. Holy crap. Alright, so I guess because it goes Lupinranger versus Patranger, I'm guessing we're gonna go with Lupinrangers first, unfortunately, even though we're all probably Patranger guys here. Alright, so with your Lupinrangers, we're gonna keep Noelle to after we get done with the base 6, and then we're gonna talk about, I guess, subsidiary characters or villains if you want to. So, we got the first 3. We got Kairi, who's Lupin Red. We got Toma, Lupin Blue. We got Umika, Lupin Yellow. Right now, like we said earlier, Red went in there because of his brother, Blue went in there because of his fiancé, and Umika went in because it was her best friend, as well as technically most of her high school class or homeroom got decimated by Zamigo's ice capture.
Yeah, but only one of them mattered.
Yeah, only one of them really mattered, but still, like, you come in and you just see, like, your entire classroom, like, and you're like, wow, huh, who thought this was gonna be Dead Man Wonderland?
I'll be your dead man.
Alright, so, I don't know how you guys want to do this. I guess we'll just go as, like, Lupinrangers all at once. Visibleninja, as usual. Your take on at least the base 3.
Yeah, I have ears. I heard you the first time. Okay, base 3. I guess we'll start with Kairi. And honestly, I kind of did like him. He definitely did seem the most carefree of the 3. Definitely seeming more like, the average kind of slightly aloof guy who, still knows what he has to do. In this case, he feels guilty about, having words with his brother and then his brother getting shattered. And honestly, like, in that situation, I don't blame him. And come to think of it, all the Lupinrangers, I guess you could say, are driven by guilt. In Toma's case, it's because his fiancée, she got shattered while she was out shopping for a wedding dress, and he couldn't get to her in time, and she got iced and shattered, which probably kicks you pretty hard in the balls. And then, of course, Umika with her friend that, had she not pushed her out of the way, she would have been iced and shattered too, so she feels guilty about that. And the overriding sense of the Lupinrangers is we gotta do what we gotta do to, get our family back. And their personalities did seem to play off each other well. Obviously, they did have, they squabbled, much like any team will, but it also did help them feel more cohesive because, well, families do that all the time. Like I said, Kairi's the carefree guy, Toma's the very straight man, he's the deadly serious one, then Umika's obviously, the girly girl, even though her fashion sense isn't that spectacular. They all fill their roles, and honestly, I think they fill them good. Like, Umika's, very positive and, has a smile on her face unless shit's getting real. Toma, again, is very cool and straightforward unless he's pushed a little too far and then he loses his shit. And Kairi, again, an aloof bastard, but when the cards are down, he nuts up and puts up. Overall, I think that the show really helped because the Lupinrangers did get the lion's share of the focus as well as the episodes and power-ups, but, that's neither here nor there. But the Lupinrangers honestly did feel like a very realistic and very kind of awesome team because their goal and what was driving them was very clear and very understandable. It was loss, it was guilt, which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to in one way or another. That's probably why they got the more focus than the straightforward, it's our job, cops. Lupinrangers, like I said, I did like them because they are clearly individuals, but they do form a cohesive team that for some reason lives in a shitty little bistro, but hey, whatever.
At least the food looked good.
Well, yeah, because Toma, he's a freaking master chef, so that helps too.
Alright, sound out. I guess your turn.
So, like I've said before, I really love this show. The Lupinrangers, I think going into the series when they started, the Lupinrangers were kind of my preference team. Promotional stuff just because I thought their vehicles looked cooler. But it's actually kind of funny. Once I have the toys, I actually ended up liking the Patranger vehicles a lot more. But anyways, so going into it, I was like prone to liking them. I was running that Persona 5 high, so I was like, yeah, Phantom Thieves. But I actually found that while the Lupinrangers had more of the story, I felt like a lot of their personalities kind of felt like they always had that like two-faced nature because they were hiding in plain sight. They were, fighting for someone they love. And so they had that nature to them, but it was also like I felt like I couldn't connect with them as well because they were hiding so much. So their personalities and their characterization wasn't as straightforward. So it made them more interesting to watch, but to connect with them was a little bit difficult. But, each individual Lupinranger I felt like was distinctive from another. They could have all been like super serious types, but you have Kairi, who's a little bit more, light and carefree in that regard. But that was just because of who he was, and it was kind of like he still had that darkness inside of him over losing his brother after the huge argument he had with him and everything that led up to that. He had a massive amount of guilt that he would carry. So it's like while he would just kind of act like stupid and just flighty, he would also have these moments where something would come up that would remind him of his brother, and then he would just snap into just pure darkness. Which I thought was really interesting. You have a character who's dealing with that much guilt and anguish to the point where he just can snap and turn on you in an instant, and you just don't know what happened, and you don't know what triggered his anger that way. Which is a lot of stuff that ended up playing with Keiichiro, because Keiichiro was like, I don't understand why this guy is so angry all of a sudden. He seems nice. Let me try to help him. And so you got kind of that aspect with him, which I thought was really interesting. Then you had Toma, and Toma felt a lot more on mission. It felt like out of all three of them, where Kairi and Umika really did want, their loved ones back, Toma really wanted his fiancée back. He felt like he let her down, like he wasn't able to protect her, and how, had happiness. And without her in his life, he was significantly less happy. He wasn't ambitious in anything. He was focused on, this is the mission, and that would kind of keep the rest of the team in line. Because when Kairi was off doing whatever, being, either depressed or angry at the world, Toma was there to say, all right, Umika, we got some treasure to steal because we need to get our people back. Which is why I think one of the most heartbreaking episodes for the Lupinrangers in general was one of them where they thought the Patrangers destroyed a collection piece. And they did it, and then Kairi wasn't there, and they were like, how do we tell him that we blew it and let the Patrangers destroy a piece? Luckily it worked out that, the piece wasn't actually in the safe, but that kind of struggle with, all right, we decided we're a team together. What happens when one of us fails or two of us fails and the whole mission's blown? What happens then? How do we deal with this? Because we screwed not only ourselves, but, our teammates. And so for that reason, I feel like Umiko was kind of the calming voice in all that. Because while she had her own sadness of losing her friend and losing her other classmates, which she didn't seem to care that much about, but losing her friend in particular, it just kind of felt like to her, I think, that, she was ready to kind of go into that dark place that Kairi and Toma have gone into. But because they went there, it almost feels like she said to herself, I'm going to be the strong rock. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be the one that's going to keep positive, because someone has to hold this team together in a positive light. And that's where I think Umika's biggest strength was giving that positive energy to the team, which helped them continue. Even if she didn't make the smartest decisions, even though she almost dated a Patranger and blew the whole secret identity, she was just trying to make everyone feel happy in the dire situation they were in. And so I think with that dynamic of everyone supporting everyone, the Lupinrangers were best when they're together, because when they got split up, without their teamwork, it didn't work. Because all of them had so much at stake, it was very much you were rooting for them to get their goal throughout the series, which is what I think is very key here, because if the Patrangers were the focus of the series, and if the Lupinrangers was a Patranger show, for example, it would be playing much like Deca Ranger, where there's less personal stakes and more just, here's our daily job as cops. So I think the focus on the Lupinrangers being the primary focus of the two teams, I think was very essential for the show's narrative going forward, because they had the stake in it. They had a lot to lose or a lot to gain from the outcome of the battles with the Ganglers. And so I think that is why they got more of a focus. Patrangers kind of still got the shaft in the end, but I'm glad that the Lupinrangers, they had that full character arc. And so I really enjoyed watching them as characters, even if they weren't always clear what they were doing, which may have been intentional to kind of keep the show a little bit edgier in that regard of well, these guys could do anything at any time because look what they did now. And so I think that was super interesting. And it almost feels like at the beginning they befriended the Patrangers just so they could keep an eye on them. But by the end of the show, they really had become friends with them outside of their Ranger lives.
Okay, so for me with the Lupinrangers, I gotta say with Santa, it's actually pretty true. with them going in, I was into the whole Phantom Thief kind of aspect. I think going in, like, I was hopefully leaning towards them. But I think the problem was there was a weird disconnect, like Samduck says, probably because of the whole, like, the fact that they have to hide, the fact that they have to do all this stuff, and they couldn't be as open as they wanted, even though if they probably were, the cops themselves, the ones that were chosen to be the Patrangers, even they state, we would have found a way to try to help you and break the law ourselves had you just been open with us the entire time. Which is, like I said, hindsight 2020 per se. But the thing is, with these characters, I feel like while they did get a lot of cool, like, interesting, like, quirks or character developing episodes, it was hard to also relate to them sometimes because I felt like they were a little bit, at the same time, it was like, why I didn't like Patranger was because they were kind of at times too funny. Like, and even though I do like funny stuff and antics in my Sentai, I sometimes feel like it does bring down a show at times when they're doing, like, a lot of these super serious, crazy storylines. And I get, like, you need to have a little bit of light with the dark, so it's kind of weird. So, like, for me, I didn't actually take to Umika immediately, because I was like, oh, great, it's your dipsy, kawaii desu girl. And so it was like, it wasn't until, like, later episodes when they started doing more of her, like, family life episodes and other stuff, where she, in a sense, grew on me, like, I became more tolerant to her shenanigans. It was like, when they did the whole episode where her father accidentally showed up and thought that Kairi was dating her, great shit, great times. And, like, there's, like, this really weird thing with the show, too, where, speaking of Kairi being shipped with Umika and, like, Kairi get shipped with a lot of things. There's Kairi and Umika. There's Kairi and Tsukasa. There's Kairi and Keiichiro. There's Umika and Sakuya. And it's like, there's also Umika and Noelle. There's Noelle and Good Striker, which we'll talk about that a little bit later, because I'm gonna tell you right now, Good Striker and Noelle, that's a ship. I'm trying to change my mind.
It's the real OTP.
It's the first one. Yeah, man, it's the real one. Okay, so anyways, like I was saying, like, they really make Kairi have, like, a weird harem anime syndrome right there, because, like, a lot of things get wet for Kairi, even if they're not on the main team. And then also that sort of happened for Keiichiro on one occasion, but we'll get to him in a minute. So, like, I think the problem I had specifically was with Kairi. One of the things I didn't like was that he was too carefree and aloof. And I think also they really build up his relationship with his brother as being a real little prick. Cause, like, what I mean by being a prick is, he's always like, oh, I'm always living in my brother's shadow, and yada, yada, yada. I'm like, you always go on about living in your brother's shadow, but yet allegedly both of your parents are dead and he raised you, and then you're mimicking your brother, hoping to get, like, some daddy approval out of him by literally copying him, and he's telling you, just be you, mom and dad would be proud, and he's like, oh, I gotta be like you. And I'm like, if the only approval you need is him, and he's giving you the approval, and you're telling him to F off, mate, you're the asshole here. And so for him being red, I couldn't get behind him as being red for a good portion of the series. Because, like, all I saw was, your brother got killed because of you, you should feel guilty, and you're an idiot. All of the issues was he was an idiot. And where Toma, his story about his fiancée, I felt like he really should have been our red, but then he wouldn't be as interesting, I guess, because we wouldn't have that weird homoerotic heterosexual life partner storyline with Kairi and Keiichiro. And I did feel like that kind of sucked, though, especially for Toma, because he only felt like he had a few defining episodes about why he's so serious, and that he's so devoted to his actual fiancée when they did the episode where the gangler switched his bodies and became a thought. So I really felt for Toma because he had the story that made me want to root for him the hardest, and then he kinda got shafted for a good portion of the show, even though he had, like, the real reason you wanted to cheer for him, the real reason you were hoping he should have been red, where Kairi here had to really earn his stripes. Because for a majority of the show, he's just like, I'm loofing around, I don't give a F what you do, Umika, I don't give an F what you do, Toma, just call me when the monster shows up and I'll be there, waka waka. And it made me hate him for a good 17, 20 episodes. Like, I just couldn't really get behind him because of that mentality. And it was like, he really had to work his ass off. And the way they wrote his character at least tried to fix all of the quirks they originally initially stuck him with. Because, like, once you see that Keiichiro's, like, friendship shows that, like, Kairi's actually the fault here, and all the guilt, should be on him, but he's learning to finally accept it, was good. Like, I felt like that was really good, because he has all these weird daddy-brother issues that are hilarious when you look at it from a Western standpoint. Now, I get that's more of the Japanese traditional stuff of, like, idolization of your father, idolization of your brother, but, like, it was kind of funny on that Western standard, and I think that's the difference of the cultural impact of the shows. We're just sitting there going, damn, you dumb boy, you dumb. So I feel like out of the base three, Kairi did have a lot to work for, but Toma got the shaft with all the shit he had to do. And it's kind of weird where he kind of is the GOAT of their team because he had to carry them a lot when Kairi wasn't around being the Gallivant Red Ranger with his, Red Ranger plot armor.
And then he literally got Red Ranger plot armor later on with.
But then
Super
he got more,
Lupin Red.
and then he got more plot armor. Yeah, exactly. So that's all I can say is that, like, with the Lupinrangers, it was really hard rooting for them, but I did enjoy them as time went on. Like, as I got to grow into them, you know what I'm saying? I had to get used to them. I had to become tolerant of them, and they grew on me. Whereas the three police officers that we're going to talk about now, Keiichiro, Sakuya, Tsukasa, they literally from the start, as most of us can agree, we were mostly leaning for Lupinranger, but the cops, they come in, we're like, oh, they look bland, they're gonna act bland. And even though they were technically bland and by the book, it felt like they had a real character-driven thing, because they're like, we're cops and we're trying to do our jobs, and you don't really need to know fully who we are, you just need to know we have the good intentions to serve justice and help anyone that is in need. And I think that's what was kind of why people got enamored with them, was because our three, red, green, and pink, wanted just do their job so good by the book that they went above and beyond the code of what it means to be a police officer. So, Visibleninja, your take on the three base Patrangers.
Okay, we'll start off with Kei-chan, Keiichiro, who is definitely the straight man of the team. He's the driven, serious police officer who does the job because of justice. And although he does seem kind of, shall we say, block-headed and somewhat single-minded, he actually does have a bit of dimension to him, since he does want to be a good cop, he wants to protect people's smiles, he wants to be justice. Yeah, like, of the three, he's probably the most flat of them, but even then, like I said, he's still ultimately, a nice dude who does befriend the Lupinrangers, although obviously he doesn't know it, especially Kairi, who he seems to have an interesting dynamic as, again, of the straight man and the bent man, so he seems to go together with them. Then there's Tsukasa, who of course does the job for more practical reasons, i.e. the money, which is good because I like the fact that Keiichiro even mentions that that's a perfectly legitimate reason to want this job, although he's doing it for the justice. But wanting a decent paycheck and a good pension, is good too, because let's face it, kids, you gotta eat. But she definitely, once again, does seem a bit more cooler than the others, but that's because, I guess you could say, because of her upbringing, because as we learned, she was raised by her martial arts master grandfather, who kind of drilled into her early. She needs to stand up for herself and know how to defend herself, although, obviously, as she found out later, it was because he really does love her quite a bit. Just wanted to make sure that she knew how to twist a guy's wrist in case she was getting perved on or something. And then her relationship with Umika, which does seem a little, I think the trope is romantic two-girl relationship, where they're not like a couple, but their dynamic seems to emulate one, with Tsukasa being the more masculine of the two, obviously Umika being the more feminine, but as we see, Tsukasa does have her soft side with her weird thing with plush animals, which is absurd and also adorable and very kawaii desu. But the two really do think of each other as girls that are friends. Girl friends. Almost like they should have an army of some kind. And then there's Sakuya, who's the junior of the team, just joined not too long ago, fresh out of the academy kind of guy. He wants to do his job as a cop to serve the public, and he also, has massive hard-on for Umika, who doesn't reciprocate until, like, the very end of the series, it seems like, when she does finally start seeing him as more of just a weird, slightly annoying guy. But, in the end, he's a good cop that means well. Yeah, he's a bit goofy and unorthodox, but in the end, he's a cop and he does his job pretty well. Which I guess is cool, because it was actually kind of nice to see Sakuya not give up his pursuit of Umika after being, I guess you could say, turned down and stonewalled so many times. Although that might not send the right message of just be persistent and she'll eventually love you. But the Patrangers, again, they did definitely seem like going into the series, they were going to be kind of boring and flat. And once we started getting to know their individual kind of backstories and personalities, they really did get fleshed out, especially Tsukasa and Sakuya, less so Keiichiro. Which is really sad that they kind of got the shaft, because maybe Toei figured that cops would maybe be a little less interesting, so that's why they kind of got shoved a little to the side at times, but they had some pretty damn good episodes, and as characters, honestly, I kind of preferred them to the Lupinrangers, but again, that's just kind of me.
Sound out, your turn.
So, I ended up really loving the Patrangers by the end. Again, much like with most people, at the beginning, it wasn't like, they're not as interesting, their toys aren't as cool. But they ended up kind of getting an underdog quality, and that underdog quality kind of led them to being something kind of special. And I thought that, like, all the characters had great arcs. Like, Keiichiro, his whole arc of, like, he's the go-getting police officer, gonna do his job right kind of thing. And that kind of led him to a lot of confrontation with the Lupinrangers, because he's like, oh, they're not doing things the right way, by the book kind of thing. But by the end, he did start to loosen up a bit of that as he realized more of a situation, and there's more than just a law book. And then you had, Sakuya, who was very basic in his thinking, but was still heartfelt and still tried his hardest. That poor stupid child tried his hardest so much. But Sakuya, like, he would come through in moments when you think he wouldn't. But honestly, the real winner of the team is Tsukasa. She is one of the finest pink senshi I think we've ever gotten, because most of the time in Sentai, a lot of the times the yellow one is going to be tougher, she'll be stronger, while the pink one's more dainty, more kind of the girly girl. Whereas in Lupinranger vs. Patranger, it's kind of the opposite, which was kind of refreshing, but it also made Tsukasa stand out as pink, because she's strong, she's tough, she'll get the job done, she's intuitive. She's the best detective on this detective team, because she actually figured out the Lupinrangers' identities really early on. There was a lot of counter evidence to how the Lupinrangers fooled them, but she figured it out pretty early on, which is really impressive. And just her overall determination and skill was not surpassed by any of the Patrangers. So I thought that was really great, because a lot of times in Sentai, the female senshi or female rangers end up getting the background treatment, or they don't get to do as much, or they're just there to be cute. Where I felt like Tsukasa actually not only improved the team, but made it its best and most effective because of her skills and everything that she brought to the table. And I did like her relationship with Umika. Like, that was kind of like a great mutual understanding thing. And the fact that Tsukasa was not kind of boneheaded like Keiichiro was, where she was thinking, all right, this is a situation where I gotta work with Lupin Yellow. I gotta work with Lupin Red. Like, you can't just do things by the book all the time. Like, you have to take risks every once in a while in order to create yourself a situation that's gonna lead to victory. And so it was like Tsukasa was willing to take those chances a lot, which I thought was great. But again, she also had her softer side, which just made her a lot more relatable and realistic. It's like, sometimes you meet the toughest people in the world, but they're actually really soft inside, and it's because they put up a tough front all the time, but every once in a while they need that tender side of them to come out a bit and, experience the warmth of the world. So I thought that was what made it kind of like a really nice balanced team overall. And they did get sidelined really bad in the second half. I'm still mad that they never got the splash trigger machine to use for themselves. I'm still mad that Siren Striker as a power-up got given to Noel in his Lupinranger form. But by the end, they all got it, and, getting Super Patron Red in the finale was one of the biggest things for me. And it's like the promo picture came out of, like, the Patrangers all using power-ups from the trigger machines, and it was just like, this is fantastic. This is what I wanted the whole time. So while I think that it was definitely a monetary decision with the tracking of sales of the Lupinranger toys typically selling better than the Patranger ones, possibly that being the reason why the Patrangers to get more sidelined was just because their toys weren't selling as well. So they figured, if we make Splash and Siren, Lupinranger vehicles, quote unquote, then they'll sell better. And it's like, it didn't really work. So they just went back to, all right, let's get the Patrangers back in. But there was that string of episodes where they didn't get to do much. And that was kind of like some of the hardest stuff to sit through, because I felt like too Lupinranger heavy kind of threw the balance of the show off a bit. So I'm glad that by the end, it kind of all worked out and the Patrangers got to shine at the very final battle.
Alright, so for our core 3 Patrangers, I'm gonna state this right now. Sakuya is the weakest one of them all, I think, because he is, as Soundout says, the dumb child. He makes you really question how he was even let on the police force, with some of the stuff he does throughout the series.
Well,
there's
a reason why he was on the police force, and that's involved a spin-off series about the other Patranger.
Yeah, who actually was the reason they found out they're wearing human disguises of Zamigo's capture victims. Anyway, so, Sakuya is one of the weakest characters in the show. He is, that lovable dork that you want to root for being, trying to do his best when he can. You don't really want to agree with him for how he keeps pursuing Umika, where it's, not the best way, which could possibly lead to sexual harassment and assault if you're in North America and you're an incel on 2chan. But I digress. Anyways, Sakuya, just weak. Keiichiro, I think one of the problems was he was a little bit too one-minded. He was a little too straightforward. He was a little too by the book, stick up his ass. That sometimes it did make him hard to like, but it also made him enjoyable because since he had this profound use of justice, of wanting to do good, not just for anyone, it made him have some of these cool breakout moments where he'd be like, oh god, Lupin Red is so much stronger than me, and then all of a sudden you'd hear the Patranger version of the theme start playing, and all of a sudden Keiichiro would just be opening, the gates like he was, I guess you would say Rock Lee and Naruto, and he's going crazy on everything, beating everything up, and nothing stood in his way. And I liked that mentality with Keiichiro, is just that, he bottles so much anger up that once it finally comes out, he's finally motivated. He's doing all the stuff he needs to do to be on the levels of these guys who are written to be kind of Gary and Mary Stews, in a sense, because of how the Lupinrangers pretty much just outclass them in some regards. And it was really great to see, Keiichiro to, break his glass ceiling in those episodes. Where Tsukasa, she's probably, Soundout says, the best pink senshi in a long while, and just as good as Momo Ninja from Ninja. Now, Ninja is, a bottom-of-the-barrel Sentai series, but when the show itself literally states Momo Ninja was the GOAT of their team, and then you have Tsukasa, who was just like Momo Ninja, but not as into shenanigans as much as Momo Ninja was. She was pretty much a GOAT in her own right. These are probably the 2 strongest pink senshis in the modern era. Or ever. So, for Tsukasa, the one thing I liked about her was she was very hard-boiled. She was hard-boiled super cop to a T, who was at first only doing it for the money, but because of what Keiichiro said to her back when they were in the police academy, she kind of changed her perspective just a bit. So what I do like is how she kind of is also super cop, but I also do love the paycheck too, is great. It makes her so much more of a weird dynamic character where even though she seems so one-dimensional, then when there's those moments where you find out she's a goober for freaking plushes, it's the greatest shit ever. And it makes her so much more enjoyable to know that when she's not in cop mode or anywhere around the police barracks, she's looking around all okay, no one looking, no one here that knows me. Alright, let me be me. And then she's being really girly, and then all of a sudden Umika shows up and she's oh no. It's it adds that level of she was trying to be super serious to the extent that she was supposed to be the best cop ever, to being the biggest dork when you take away all of the, the suit, the uniform, and the badge. She's yeah, I'm a loser who loves plushes. Sue me. But, it made her so endearing because she, did so much, as Soundout said. She just carried her team. Even though she carried her team as a team, Keiichiro was the powerhouse, and she was just I'm the brains. What are you, Sakuya? Oh yeah, idiot. Sit there, eat your candy. We'll call you when we need you. That's literally what the show felt like. It was great, it was fun, and that's how I liked the Patrangers, was here's the brawn, the brains, and what the hell are you? And that's what they felt like for most of the show. I think that's what made them more endearing as time went on. It did make them the underdog once, obviously, Toei was hey, we're gonna make this all Lupinranger, nothing but Lupinranger. And it made it so annoying and so weird. Especially when they were oh yeah, we're gonna have it that the Patrangers have weird fetishes for the Lupinrangers. Yeah, green, you are sexually addicted to yellow. Red, you're sexually addicted to red. Tsukasa, you're also sexually addicted to red and yellow, but you think blue is a thought. And it was the weirdest way of shipping whatsoever. And it made this series that even more hectically hilarious. That's my take, and I'm sticking to it. So since we got the main 6 out of the way, let's just try to narrow it down to, obviously, Noelle, Kogure, Hilltop, Jim, Goody, and if you want to talk about villains, we'll talk about villains, but we'll pass it around to Visibleninja. Your thoughts on, like I said, Noelle and the support characters for our good guys.
Good old Noelle, who's definitely, the wild card. You're like, whose side is he on? Is he with the Lupinrangers? Is he with the Patrangers? He keeps flip-flopping. Or is he on his own? Which is kind of true, but not really. Since he is, he's one of these descended people, so he does have some of the slight quirks, but he is member of the global police force, but he's also working for the Lupin estate. And I'm actually honestly astounded that both the Lupinrangers and the Patrangers trusted Noel as much as they did. Even though especially the Patrangers seemed to not trust him very much at times, they still let him go and do whatever the shit he was doing. But Noel himself, like I said, he was very personable, very charming with his refined, debonair ways, and obviously he was, a bit of a mechanical guy too, since, he did build the Versus Changers, and not to mention other stuff, like helping maintaining his one true love, Good Striker, who's also a bit of a wild card, and needless to say, could be kind of flighty and weird, since he just arbitrarily decides to help a team whether or not he's feeling it or not, which is kind of interesting. So if you do something cool, he might help you. If not, well, bugger off then, which was kind of an interesting dynamic, especially with a sentient main mecha, I guess you could say, that kind of had a mind of its own, quite literally, and liked to cosplay. But hey, goodies, one of the things that makes the show great. As for some of the supporting cast, Kogure was kind of flat. I mean, yeah, we did find out later his deal about the whole thing with the arson estate and the people from the Gangler world. And Kogure always seemed just to be using the Lupinrangers for his own end, although towards the end he obviously did have a bit more concern for them personally, as he maybe did start becoming a bit attached to them, but he was always kind of just a flat magical butler that showed up and was also really good at being a master of disguise and can make people not look at his feet, I guess. As for Commander Hilltop, he was, the good mentor / what in charge type who didn't really get a whole lot of characterization. I mean, he's a good cop and everything, has a thing for, Japanese sweets and everything, and same thing with Jim Carter. Jim Carter's the robot, kind of supposed to be sort of comedic, named after Chris Tucker's character from Rush Hour. And the villains. Flat. Don Gorno. Haha, I'm the Don and I'm retiring. I'm just gonna sit here and do nothing. Like I've said before, the Ganglers, despite coming off as a mafia kind of style family, at least in presentation, in their own world, kind of didn't come across. It was just a bunch of random mooks with safes shoved into them and with random Sentai props stuck into them that had to be retrieved. So I wasn't a big fan of the Ganglers, definitely one of the weaker villain groups we've seen as of late. They were completely boring and unimaginative, at least when it came to some of their suit designs. But yeah, definitely not one of the better villains. And that's it for me.
Sound out.
Is it time for me to talk about Backflip Boy?
Yes.
Noel was a treat. I really did enjoy his introduction because he kind of mixed up the formula a bit at the time that this formula was starting to get a little stale. He was just a twist in the whole plan, and I thought it was great because he was working both sides. You weren't really sure who he was working for. He kind of added a depth of mystery, and it was really why did anyone trust him? But at the same time, he's so charming that, yeah, sure, he's really easy to be trustworthy because he's just so dang charming. But yeah, I find it funny that he ended up not only shipping everybody with everybody, but was involved in the ship with everybody. And yeah, his one true love is Good Striker. That's absolutely 100%. I think that, overall, his idea behind a lot of what he did was he was actively trying to get the two teams to work together at a certain point because he realized that was what was going to achieve the goal of defeating the Ganglers a lot better, was being able to get them to work together instead of fighting each other all the time. So I felt like his ability to switch modes was what really helped with that a lot. So I thought he was great in that regard. In terms of other secondary characters, Good Striker I thought was fantastic. I loved the scene where Good Striker is just sadly swinging on a swing because he's not really sure about his existence, which I thought was really great. But it also kind of for a minute before they revealed the actor playing Noel, I thought for a second that it was wait, is Good Striker going to become human and then become Lupin X Pattern X? Because he was playing that same game of let me work with both teams kind of aspect because he liked both of them enough. But, it ended up being what it ended up being. I think in the end, both those characters I think were the most helpful, like, supporting cast. Kogure was just kind of there. He did stuff. He had an episode where his personality got split, which was kind of fun. But it was kind of neat just the number of disguises he could go through. Hilltop was cool. He just didn't get to do a whole lot. He never really did as much field work, especially later in the show. He kind of felt like he wasn't even there. Jim Carter being a robot was just like a little robot buddy. Nothing more than that. In terms of ganglers, we had Genis 2.0 and Naria 2.0 and Azal 2.0 and Zamigo. And Zamigo, I think, was the only like really interesting villain, but they kept him in their pockets a lot, which I know frustrated a lot of people, but it was really satisfying when he did finally start doing more stuff and taking more risks and then getting into bigger battles and such. I thought that was kind of satisfying. The wait for Zamigo actually ended up, I think, paying off, whereas Destra was just not anything to really talk about. I think with this show in particular, there was so much going on with the two different teams storyline that it sometimes felt like there wasn't time to develop the villains. And maybe going in there like, let's just not bother developing the villains. They're just there to have a reason for these two teams to fight over stuff because the story is more about them. And so that's just kind of the role they served. I did really love the final battle with Dogranio. And I did really love the fact that they set it up to kind of leave it ambiguous for a bit of an episode to see if the Patrangers, especially Keiichiro, was going to break his code and then just kill Dogranio because of what he had done instead of, arresting him, which he ended up doing. I thought that was like a great struggle to have. And I like the aspect of the Lupinrangers being trapped in Dogranio. Like, that was a lot of good dramatic tension, I think, for a final episode. So I think their powers worked out to be good adversaries to fight, but as characters, the villains were very weak overall.
Alright, so my take is Noelle is probably the best character for the show to try to, at least, like Sounded said, bring together our two conflicting halves with the Lupinrangers versus the Patrangers. And it worked out pretty well. I think it helped at least stall that whole long game of the cat and mouse ideology that they really wanted to go with. Even though I didn't intentionally agree with it, it did at least help to prolong their, I guess you would say, their gambit on the show. It might not have been the best move to keep it going as long as they did, but it did help. I think what's Noelle's best attribute is as he did come in, he did seem like he was going to be some kind of antithesis that was either there to outright show that Kogure might be a bad guy like fans originally thought he was. Because that's what I really thought, was that he was supposed to be like a bad guy in disguise. And then the joke of the matter was that, oh no, he's not really a bad guy. The irony is he's actually just a hard-assed SOB with a stick up his butt. And it was kind of interesting that they chose that route. Is that, he's just got a stick up his butt and Noelle's just a hotshot, edge on the seat of his pants kind of guy. So I think that was a real interesting story, the one that they were building up, was that they're both like, oh no, we're both doing our jobs, but we have two different narratives in a sense, like they had two different mindsets to them. And it did throw off a lot of those early theories, obviously, because with Kogure, as Sound Out and Metal said, he didn't get to do much, and then when they finally made him to be a character you want to care about, it's in the episode where they almost kill him. Like, no one really liked him, no one really loved him, but they made us, not want him dead, which was rather interesting, because a lot of people thought he was going to end up being the Don's human form, or one of the characters' human form in the world, but it wasn't. And there was also the theory that the Don was actually Arsene Lupin himself, which would have been a cool plot twist, but I don't think they really wanted to go that dark and crazy. So overall, like, with those characters, Kogure and Noelle working as, like, trying to bring the team, well, not really bring the teams, but inadvertently did bring the teams together, did bring some interesting, storylines. Good Striker, since he was a sentient mecha that helped cooperate with them, or work with them, added for some really cool shenanigans, like there'd be like the times where he wouldn't want to work with them, or he would choose to team up with them, and it would just lead to, hectic scenarios where they'd just even be fighting over him. So the Lupinrangers said, listen, if you don't help us, we're gonna kick the shit out of you. And he was like, okay, I'm not into that kind of stuff, but okay. And I think that worked out perfectly effing fine. Whereas Jim and Hilltop, yeah, they got sidelined terribly. They were mostly used for weird comedic bits, and that was about it, which was kind of depressing. And then our villains, like Sound said, Zamigo was used way too weirdly. Like, he would be either there and not there, and I think the way that they did it was not the right way, neither the wrong way. I feel like when they started using him towards the late game, it was good, but I feel like there were certain elements of the build-up that could have been a lot smoother. And I think that was just a weird nitpick I had, was that, like, it didn't feel as smooth as it should have been, the transition of why he was there and what was going on. Because when you find out one of his real narratives is like, oh yeah, Red's my plaything, but I also want the Don to be the old villain that he was, I found that rather a weird take of that was Amigo's true end goal, was to hope that Gauche and Destra died just so the Don would get off his ass and start doing work again. That did feel very underwhelming for at least his end-all be-all game, was Amigo was just like, oh, I just want my boss to be my boss again. And, like, I get, like, it was that weird honor, but for most of the show, it never foreshadowed that, since most of the show was, I'm trying to find my successor, and Zamigo was like, well, I don't want to be the successor, nor do I give a rat's ass. So it was a weird, I guess you would say, 180 flip. It was kind of confusing, because they never insinuated that he even gave a rat's ass about the Don. So that's just me personally. Even though the Don was a cool kind of character, he just did too much sitting on his ass. Anyone want to add to that?
I think with Del Granio is that he wasn't as satisfying as Genis and Zyuohger. One of the greatest scenes in Zyuohger was the time that Genis stood up. Like, it's just basically, it was like he sat for so long, but when he stood up, he just was so powerful and just so intimidating that it felt like, oh wow, okay, they were holding him back this whole time. Or that he was just watching his games play for fun, and that if he had joined the show earlier, the heroes would have stood no chance against him. And I didn't get that feeling from Del Granio. He just didn't have that intimidation factor. He was strong, yes, but he didn't have that oh shit moment that Genis had. If he had one of those, it would have reflected a lot better overall.
Yeah, because I think they burst their bubble with his oh shit moment in, like, one of the earliest episodes, like episode 10 or 15, where he just, like, sweeps the Patrangers when it's still early in the series, and then he doesn't do it as often that he should have, to build up his emphasis of, I'm this badass, so I think that did hurt him. But overall, like I said, I think the villains, while they were very old school Sentai, they didn't have a good incentive either, and that's what probably was lacking compared to the villains of the modern era. Other than that, though, we did run down our characters. We're almost going into overtime with our original expectations of how far we were going to run with this. So let's just quickly try to do a rundown of our themes of the mecha and concept, where we do talk about a bit of the toys, where we have obviously your trigger machines and your dial fighters. The dial fighters are obviously all jets and planes. The trigger machines are all, like, car-based vehicles. One specifically for cops, the other for obviously the Lupinrangers. However, as the show goes on, it gets more Lupinrangers-centric, even though it shouldn't have been. And we also have planes, trains, and automobiles for the whole, I guess, thing, since Noel was just crazy in creating them. So, Visibleninja, just try to be maybe not too abrupt or too swift, but give us your take on the mecha in your regards.
It was definitely an interesting idea, having one core mecha that the other three essentially just pile on. Especially with them all being more or less equal in size. Like, Red's usually is the bulkier of the ones, because it's usually the one that has a standalone mode or some such like that. Whereas in this case, he was about the same size as his compatriots. That's mainly because the main body was a completely separate piece that was, shared between the Patrangers and the Lupinrangers, which honestly was a very good idea. As for the whole aesthetics of, like, the dial fighters and the trigger machines, honestly, most of them were actually pretty good. I seem to like the dial fighters a little more. Like, I don't know why, as opposed to the trigger machines for some reason. Like, I can't really quantify that. But the actual mecha themselves, like I said, Lupinrangers is obviously most people's favorites because of the Red's dial forming a bit of a swanky, top hat kind of thing. Plus, he has a wrecking saw for a hand and a chain gun for a hand. And really, what else did you want? However, the Patranger one was also pretty cool. I also really like Pat Kaiser, although having Red's head be kind of recessed inside of a giant cavity was a little weird, as well as the whole grinding wheel thing on the front of it. But hey, whatever. We got a cannon and a baton out of the other two, which make a bit of sense when it comes to cops. Obviously, there's all the upgrades and stuff, like you got Cyclone, Biker, Magic, victory, and it just goes insane, and they get increasingly more cluster-F-y. But with X-Emperor, honestly, I love the idea that it's essentially two trains ramming into each other, forming an X, and then it basically can just, like, do a massive, like, cartwheel to either be in Lupin mode or Patranger mode, which I thought was a pretty cool idea. Like, in practice, the Patranger mode was a little bit more uglier since he had this giant cannon just kind of hanging off his front for no reason, but hey, whatever. And then combining all together isn't the best looking thing in the world. His Good Cool Kaiser VSX is kind of a bit fugly. The Mini-Pla version does look a bit better because you're able to reposition some of the parts and such a little bit to make it look a bit more, I don't want to say realistic, but a bit more sensible. Which is one of the benefits of the Mini-Pla mechas, but that's neither here nor there. Ultimately, like I said, they had some really, really great ideas, and most of them, I think, landed. Some of them, like the final, Cluster F form, just kind of didn't really do it for me overall.
Sound out, go.
So, me being someone that owns all the toys except for Jackpot Striker, because screw you, Bandai, for not producing enough of those. The interesting part that we have is that while the Lupinrangers took possession of Splash and Siren, the number of Dial Fighters and number of Trigger Machines is equal. There are 7 for each type, which is awesome because it's nice and even. And then the Lupinrangers get a bonus mecha in the form of Lupin Magnum. And then, of course, Noel has the X trains, as well as the additional X trains that he needs, 2 VS changers to summon for him. But overall, the vehicle count is even, so if the original plan had been intact, both teams would have had the same amount of mecha, with the Lupinrangers just getting, like, 1 extra mecha, which I think is kind of cool. Like, it would have been nice if both teams had gotten an extra mecha, especially with how small the Lupin Magnum ends up being. But it's just not one of those cases that happen. But it's not unlike a lot of Red Senshi and getting their own separate mecha in previous seasons, so it's not too out of the blue. I like the way that the Good Striker could be the base for both teams and both types of vehicles. I wish there was more torsos in the series, just for a little bit more variety. I don't like VSX very much at all. It's a combo I don't think looks great. In toy form, it doesn't even hold together because of really poor design. But one of the biggest things that I think is my biggest issue, and I think it's something that they realized later, was that Splash being given to Lupinrangers first. Cool idea, but the fact they never got it back was kind of a bummer, because it definitely didn't fit the Lupinranger style, and it didn't fit the Lupin Kaiser stuff very well. But I am happy that the Patrangers eventually got Siren Striker to use as the mecha, even if it was on loan from Noel, so we could get Siren Pato Kaiser, because that kind of gives him this final transformation. One of the weirdest things in terms of mecha and power-ups is because the mecha are the transformation devices and the power-up items, it does lead to kind of some weirdness with that. But one thing I want to highlight is that in the series, the Siren Striker is given to the Lupinrangers, and they always fire it at Noel to give him Super Lupin X, which is a Lupinranger form with a Patranger armor with the giant Patranger symbol on it. I think it was designed to be for Patra and Ichigo, so it would be Super Patra and Ichigo from the beginning instead of at the end of the series. And that all is backed up in the sound in the VS changer itself for the Siren Striker, as this would have been programmed prior to the series airing. But that in the series, a lot of the sound is the same for the Siren Striker, except for the last bit of it. So the fact that it says Cho Keisatsu change as well as Patranger just says to me that Siren Striker was Keiichiro's from the planning stages and even way back when they programmed the toy. So I'm glad that it ended up in the right hands eventually, but it was kind of a bummer that there was a backwards loophole around it, which is why the Lupinrangers ended up having 2 additional VS vehicles on top of their additional mecha. But overall, I thought the line was cool. I thought there was a lot of variety in limbs, in parts. I just wish there was a little bit more combination potential and maybe some bigger combos. Like, it would have been cool if, like, all 7 of the Lupinranger vehicles could have combined and all 7 of the Patranger vehicles could have combined in some way. But overall, I like the line a lot, and it has a lot more variety than some other vehicle-based Sentai seasons.
Alright, I'm gonna make it simple. I do like the idea that we had planes, trains, and automobiles. I called it from the start, if anyone remembers. There was the part where I said it's gonna be planes, and someone said, no, it's gonna be boats, and I said, no, they're wrong, it's trains. Japan is very train-centric. I do like the fact that we did have the dial fighters and the trigger machines. Trigger machines are kind of weird since we find out that they're actually able to lock safes, but we don't find out about that till like the very end of the show. Whereas the dial fighters unlock them, which is like a weird thing that we didn't learn that till the very end, and I felt like they pulled that out of their ass last minute. But for the combinations, the base Kaisers look pretty damn nice. Their combination, I think it's fugly, but I love VSX, and I really did enjoy it. I love it as a mini-plot. I do see, though, why it could be hard to combine, though, as a deluxe mecha, and I do think overall their arsenal was pretty okay outside of the police megaphone baton weapon. I think those were the weakest stuff in the concept of the show, really. Because the weird sword claw thing worked out fine. The armors for Lupinrangers and the Patrangers, really cool, really liked it. I think it worked out perfectly in the show's overall dynamic. But I think the problem really was like you said, the toy-centric marketing, where they kind of just said, no, F you, and went around their merry freaking little way. And I think that did immensely hurt their overall productivity for at least the one team versus the other. But, I mean, Bandai just wanted to recuperate their losses with the overall money that they were having issues with at this time. So I can't really fault them too much, but that's still bad on them to create stuff and then go, no, we're changing it up. And this is why I kind of don't like how the Tokusatsu mindset is we're still writing and pretty much filming the show as it's going on. I kind of wish it's like some of these seasons we were more ahead of the game. So by the time they're practically done, the ratings of the actual toy sales or show can't entirely affect the overall end game of your series, if you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. A lot of that comes from the fact that they're writing it while the series is still being produced, while the toy line's happening, because of how long the shows are. Stuff isn't done in advance. But I really think they should stick to their guns, because in the end of the day, it seemed like while sales-wise things were, the Lupinrangers were selling better, by the time Siren and Splash came around, switching them to the Lupinrangers from the Patrangers didn't help sales. In fact, sales went down. Possibly because people had come around on the Patrangers and wanted their stuff again, or they thought the stuff didn't look like it matched the Lupinranger thing, so they just stuck to dial fighters. The whole line was set up that Lupinrangers have dial fighters, trigger machines belong to the Patrangers, and maybe switching them like that didn't push people to buy them as much as they thought it would be. And I think that marketing taking over the quality of a series itself is really just not something that ever works out, and I hope that Toei learned that lesson this time around so it doesn't happen again.
Alright then, so we pretty much did the entire show of Lupinranger vs. Patranger, so before we do our outro, final thoughts, Visibleninja, first you.
LuPat, a show that had quite a bit of potential. It did fumble on a couple of key areas, like kind of uninteresting villains and an overall plot that wasn't that great in the end, but the characters on both sides, as well as the overall concept of two kind of competing teams, really does help the show stand out. Plus the mecha are pretty cool. In the end, it's a different, kind of very unique Sentai that ultimately winds up being pretty good. Not spectacular, like super phantasmerifically great, but it's a damn solid show with a bit of a unique twist on the Sentai concept.
Overall, like I've said just throughout, I love the show. I think it's very unique. It's very interesting and fun to watch. And, you know, it is a good show. Like, as much as I do love it, I don't put it as, like, best Sentai ever or anything. That still belongs to Live Man. But it's still a show I highly recommend. And if you hadn't had a chance to check it out, go for it. It's enjoyable. It's fun to watch. And just go into it knowing the villains are weak and the story may just pause for 10 episodes at a time. It's just the nature of the show and how that was done. And I still really enjoy it. And I can't wait to see Lupinranger versus Patranger versus Kyuranger. That's like the most exciting thing for me right now. And I can't wait to see it. That's LuPat for me.
Alright, my final thoughts are, I think the series had a good concept with the idea of doing two teams versus each other. Do I think it was executed correctly? Not necessarily so. I think it was executed all right. There are issues, like I said, the cat and mouse game ran a little too long. The villains, they needed a little bit more oomph to give you a real emphasis on knowing that they were really as strong as they were and as bad as they were. Because every week, they were just getting those collection pieces back like it didn't mean shit, to be honest with y'all. I think that there was like a bit of mysteries about characters and ideas that weren't just theories made by Western fans, but Japanese fans too, that Toei, since they were still producing the show as theories were coming out on the internet, they could have maybe altered to actually maybe done to help the show a bit in some regards, or maybe would have made the show worse in others. But I do think overall, the one thing they didn't maybe do was listen a little bit to their fans. Not cater to them, but listen to ideas that they could have built the show around. Because I think if they were ever to do a versus Sentai series ever again, which I don't think they're going to do in the immediate future, maybe do something that would sound a little bit more interesting and cooler in regards to cops versus robbers, but something like I suggested since the start, samurais versus ninjas, which could actually lead to a really interesting concept because they both use some similar weapons and styles, where it wouldn't seem too abstract to go, why is this being also used by our ninja team? Why is this being used by our samurai team? And it would work, I think, very efficiently in that regards. So hopefully they don't ice this concept and idea, but when they do it again, use themes that might not seem as counterproductive. That's just me. As well as don't entirely let your toys garner how the show goes. But that's Bandai in a nutshell and Toei too. So overall, I think Lupinranger vs. Patranger might not be the series to get a fan into Sentai, but it may be the next show or one of the first few that you could show and they could still be interested in. Alright then, so overall, we do recommend LuPat is a show you may be interested in watching, just don't make it your first. Anyways, this has been our 90th episode of Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu. I'm your host, Wheelchair21, joined by SoundOut12, Visibleninja. All of our contact information should be in the description below, as well as for Hero Club itself, also in the description, and you'll be able to see it and hear it in our outro. We'll see you all next week with episode 91.
Hey, it's Wheelchair21, and thanks again for listening to an all-new episode of Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu. If you want to hear more content or see more content from the Hero Club YouTube channel, we're going to need you to subscribe, like, comment with some feedback, and share this channel with a friend. We also would like you to check out our website, hero-club.com, and follow us on various social media outlets just by looking up Hero Club for Life, as well as the stores you see are where we shop. Anyways, thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.